1889. The tropical jungles of Panama. Rain has been falling for 3 consecutive weeks, turning the earth into a liquid red slurry. The air is so thick and hot that breathing takes a physical effort. It smells of stagnant water, tropical fever vapors, and damp, rusting iron. Among the towering ferns stand endless rows of wooden crosses. Most of them are already blackening and rotting away in the humidity. There are no names here, only registration numbers hastily burned into the wooden planks. More than 20,000 workers have laid down their lives in this swampy soil, trying to accomplish what was considered impossible: to cut a continent in half. And thousands of kilometers away, in an opulent study in the center of Paris, an elderly man in a fine suit dips a quill into ink with a trembling hand. He is signing a bankruptcy document that will, in an instant, crush the savings of 800,000 ordinary families, auction off the wealth of millions, and plunge an entire nation into political chaos. This is not just the story of building a grand canal. It is the story of the 19th century's greatest financial scandal, where human lives were measured in tons of excavated soil. Geopolitics was written in the blood of nameless workers, and the price of uniting 2 oceans proved to be far more terrifying than anyone had ever dared to admit.
It all began with megalomania and a blind faith in human triumph.
The 74-year-old diplomat, Ferdinand de Lesseps, was a true god of the engineering world. It was he who connected the Mediterranean and Red Seas, conquering the Isthmus of Suez and winning fame as a man for whom no obstacle existed. When, on a May day in 1879 in Paris, he announced his new project to cut the Panama Ridge in half, France gave him a standing ovation. His charisma literally hypnotized the public. Lesseps had no engineering background, yet he easily convinced thousands of investors that Panama would be no more complicated than the Egyptian desert. It was a catastrophic mistake. Suez was flat sand and dry air. Panama was an impenetrable tropical hell of swamps, lethal epidemics, the untamed Chagres River, and the rugged Culebra mountain range. Prominent experts, including the builder of the Eiffel Tower, Gustave Eiffel, warned of an inevitable disaster. But blinded by triumph, Lesseps categorically refused to use locks. He insisted it would be nothing more than a straight sea-level channel, just like in Egypt. The first day of January, 1880. To the roar of orchestras, blaring fanfares, and the praise of the crowd, Lesseps personally strikes a pickaxe into the soil of the isthmus. French shopkeepers, teachers, doctors, and retirees poured in their last savings, buying shares of the company en masse, unaware that they were signing a death sentence for their own future with their own hands. The grand deception and a colossal tragedy had begun. French engineers and thousands of hired laborers arrived on the Isthmus of Panama, stepping straight into a living tropical hell. The heat hung so thick and heavy that every single breath demanded physical effort. The viscous stench of coal smoke from the first steam shovels mixed with the sickening fumes of swamp mud, rusty water, and rotting timber. But the most terrifying enemy was neither the heavy equipment nor Mount Culebra, which they were attempting to carve through. The enemy was something no one saw and no one understood. Every evening, a thick, ominous cloud of mosquitoes rose over the camp. French hospital doctors trying to protect helpless patients from crawling insects, placed the legs of the beds in cups of water. They had no suspicion that in this very standing water, Aedes aegypti mosquitoes were laying their eggs en masse. The hospitals turned into lethal incubators of death. A worker would wake up in the morning with nothing more than a dull ache in their temples. By noon, their skin turned a toxic yellow, and by evening, they were dying, vomiting black, coagulated blood. Yellow fever and malaria wiped out up to 80% of workers within the first 3 months of their arrival. Wooden coffins were ordered by the thousands, but they were still never enough. When the coffins ran out, bodies were dumped into railway tank cars and covered in quicklime.
While people were dying en masse from fever in the tropical jungles of Panama, a very different kind of work was underway in the offices of Paris. Ferdinand de Lesseps understood. The project was collapsing catastrophically. Money was draining like water, yet only a tiny fraction of the soil had been excavated. Massive landslides at Culebra Cut repeatedly buried the excavation pit, wiping out months of backbreaking labor. Instead of honestly admitting defeat, the company's leadership launched one of the largest disinformation campaigns in history. French newspapers were bought wholesale, receiving millions of francs to publish fake reports about thriving towns and successful progress. More than 150 members of parliament and cabinet ministers took bribes to pass a law authorizing one final bond issue. Ordinary French citizens, teachers, farmers, and small shopkeepers surrendered their last savings, blindly believing in mythical profits. In 1889, the bubble burst with a loud crash. The Universal Company of the Panama Interoceanic Canal declared bankruptcy. Over 1.4 billion gold francs vanished. 800,000 investors found themselves on the brink of poverty, and dozens of defrauded people took their own lives. A high-profile trial began. For decades, the word Panama became synonymous with dirty political scandal, while the legendary Lesseps himself descended completely into madness, unable to endure the shame. It seemed the Isthmus of Panama was impossible to conquer. Rusted French machinery scattered across the swamps, and thousands of nameless graves terrified any potential investor. No one in Europe dared to challenge these deadly jungles anymore. But on the other side of the Atlantic, a man unaccustomed to backing down was watching the disaster closely. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States. To him, the canal was not merely a commercial venture or an engineering endeavor. It was the key to global dominance. Roosevelt's vision was forged during the Spanish-American War of 1898. Back then, the American battleship Oregon was executing an emergency order to sail from the Pacific Ocean to the Caribbean Sea. The ship voyaged around the entire South American continent through the tempestuous Cape Horn. 14,000 miles, 66 days of relentless danger, while Washington calculated every single hour. Roosevelt realized a nation that spends months transferring its fleet cannot be a superpower. The one who controls the narrow passage between the oceans controls the world. In 1902, the United States bought out the remaining assets and construction rights from the bankrupt French company for $40 million. The Americans were ready for battle. But there was one problem. The land of Panama belonged to a sovereign nation, Colombia. Washington sends a treaty to Bogota. The United States will lease a strip of land across the isthmus for 100 years. But Colombia's Senate unanimously rejects the deal. deeming it insulting to national sovereignty and far too cheap. Theodore Roosevelt is furious. He has no intention of waiting months or bargaining. And so, in the offices of the White House and hotel rooms across New York, a secret geopolitical plot is set in motion. In November 1903, in Panama, at the time merely an isolated, impoverished province of Colombia, an artificially orchestrated uprising for independence suddenly erupts. The chief architects of the conspiracy are local merchants bought off with American money and a French adventurer, Philippe Bunau-Varilla, desperate to salvage his worthless shares. When Colombian troops moved to crush the revolt, the American warship Nashville silently pulls into the Caribbean port of Colón. American guns block the railroad, preventing Colombian soldiers from taking a single step through the jungle. Within 72 hours, Panama becomes an independent republic. Just days later in Washington, that very same Frenchman, Bunau-Varilla, who didn't even hold a Panamanian passport, signs a treaty granting the United States a 10-mile canal zone in perpetuity. Colombia was simply stripped bare in front of the entire world, without a single shot of a major war ever being fired.
America arrived on the isthmus, but the Panamanian swamps didn't care about American flags. Disease raged just as fiercely as it had under the French. The first chief engineer, John Wallace, fled Panama after just 1 year, broken and panicked by the massive mortality rate. His successor, John Frank Stevens, did something insane. He ordered a complete halt to all earthworks. Not a single shovel in the dirt, not a single explosion, until housing, water supply lines, and hospitals were built. Stevens was the first to realize that the project's true enemy was not solid rock, but invisible microbes. He gave full carte blanche and an unlimited budget to military physician William Gorgas. Drawing on the research of Cuban scientist Carlos Finlay, Gorgas knew what the French had once arrogantly dismissed. Deadly yellow fever and malaria were carried by ordinary mosquitoes. Thus began the most massive sanitation war in history. Thousands of workers formed specialized mosquito brigades. They cleared dozens of square kilometers of jungle around settlements, drained every puddle, and poured hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil and kerosene into standing water to suffocate the larvae. The windows and doors of every barracks were covered in wire mesh. It cost a colossal fortune. But the result stunned the world. By 1906, yellow fever in the Canal Zone was completely eradicated. The enemy in the air had been defeated. Now came the time to defeat the enemy in the earth. After Stevens's resignation, a man in a military uniform arrived on the isthmus. Army Colonel and stern engineer George Washington Goethals. He permanently buried the idea of a sea-level canal. It had been a deadly dead end. During torrential rains, the unruly Chagres River turned into a raging torrent that wiped out any trench. Goethals chose a different revolutionary path. If it is impossible to lower the land to ocean level, you must raise the ocean itself. In the path of the Chagres River, they erected the giant earthen Gatun Dam, at that time the largest dam on the planet. Flooding hundreds of square kilometers of jungle, engineers created the artificial Gatun Lake, rising 26 meters above sea level. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity and monumental in its execution. Instead of a continuous ditch, a water staircase. A ship enters a narrow concrete chamber, and behind it close steel gates as tall as a 7-story building. Through underground tunnels, the diameter of a train car,
Millions of liters of water flow into the chamber by gravity. No pumps, just gravity and millions of tons of concrete. In 15 minutes, the ship smoothly rises upward. After crossing the lake, the vessel enters a second system of locks, where the water just as smoothly lowers it back down to ocean level on the opposite side of the continent.
But between the artificial lake and the Pacific Ocean stood an unyielding stone monolith, the mountain ridge and the sinister Culebra Cut. It was true hell on Earth. 6,000 men descended every day to the bottom of the narrow canyon, where temperatures under the tropical sun reached 50 degrees Celsius. The air was poisoned by diesel fumes, explosive gases, and hot, acidic dust. The noise was so deafening that men quickly lost their hearing. The relentless roar of hundreds of steam shovels, the thunder of train cars, and dynamite explosions that echoed daily strictly on schedule, precisely at 11:55 and 5:15. But the rock put up a brutal resistance. Landslides became the engineer's ultimate nightmare. Picture this. You spend months clearing a section, and suddenly, at night, an entire mountainside, along with centuries-old trees, railway tracks, and 10-ton steam shovels, slides down into the pit. In a single instant, the earth buried the results of a year's grueling labor, and dozens of workers crushed right inside their calves. The mountain seemed to live a dark life of its own. Under the colossal pressure of the rock masses, the canyon floor would buckle and rise upward right before their eyes. To carve out this cut, so much earth had to be removed that it could build a solid stone wall around the entire globe. But who were the people whose hands actually built this engineering wonder of the world? The American administration introduced the harshest racial system of its era across the isthmus. The entire construction effort was strictly divided into two categories, the gold roll and the silver roll. The gold roll meant white Americans. They received high salaries in U.S. gold currency, lived in cozy cottages with mosquito screens and fans, and enjoyed free health care, private clubs, and fresh food shipped in weekly from New York. The silver roll was made up of over 30,000 black workers brought in from Barbados, Jamaica, and Martinique. They earned mere pennies in dull silver and survived in overcrowded barracks or half-rotted tents right in the middle of tropical swamps. Even their drinking water was segregated. It was onto their shoulders that the most hellish work fell. Manually setting dynamite into scorching rock, hauling heavy railway rails, and working under a rain of falling stone and landslides. If a white engineer was killed in an explosion, it became front-page news in American newspapers. If dozens of workers from the silver roll were left buried under rock slides in the canyon, their names were often not even entered into official casualty records. They were simply crossed off the ledgers like damaged tools. October 10th, 1913. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson sits in his office at the White House. On his desk lies a single white button. He touches it with his finger, and a thin electrical impulse instantly surges through underwater telegraph cables 4,000 kilometers away, straight to the Isthmus of Panama. In an instant, a colossal explosion thunders. Tons of dynamite tear apart the final concrete dike at Gamboa. With a terrifying roar and foam, the muddy red waters of Lake Gatun rush into the rock-hewn Culebra Cut. The earth,
has finally been sliced straight through. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are united. 10 months later, on August 15, 1914, the steamship Ancon solemnly parts the calm waters of the canal, becoming the first vessel to pass through this new steel waterway. The sea route between New York and San Francisco was cut overnight from 13,000 miles down to 5,000. The builders saved ships months of perilous navigation around stormy Cape Horn. It was one of the greatest engineering triumphs in human history, bought with superhuman labor and thousands of lives. But the world barely noticed this triumph. Just 2 weeks before the Ancon's maiden voyage, World War I broke out in Europe. The newspaper front pages that should have blared headlines about the grand union of the oceans were completely filled with dispatches from the fronts, mobilization, and the first rivers of blood. The monumental celebration of human genius drowned in the roar of artillery from a new global slaughter.
When the dust of construction finally settled, and the thunder of artillery shells in the First World War drowned out the ceremonial speeches, it was time to tally the true cost of this monumental battle. The French and American campaigns together cost over $600 million in the money of that time, an astronomical sum that today would equal tens of billions. But the financial loss was nothing compared to the ultimate price. Official reports from Washington calmly recorded 25,500 dead. According to unofficial data from independent researchers, that figure well exceeds 30,000 people. Yellow fever, malaria, landslides, and premature dynamite explosions claimed dozens of lives every single day. In the language of pure mathematics, this meant a chilling ratio. Every single kilometer cut through rocks and swamps cost nearly 100 human lives. Every 500 meters of land, 50 graves. Yet conquering the isthmus demanded another sacrifice, the sovereignty of an entire country. The winner of this bloody slaughter took everything. The United States created its own untouchable empire inside Panama, the Panama Canal Zone. This territory was tightly enclosed in barbed wire and covered by American military bases. Washington's laws applied here. American police patrolled, and Panamanians themselves did not even have the right to set foot on their own land without special permits and passes. For decades, this colossal artery remained a source of billions in profits for Washington and an unhealed national wound for Panama itself. The dark swath of American control sliced the country in half. But on January 9, 1964, years of mounting tension finally exploded. A group of Panamanian students marched peacefully to a school in the Canal Zone simply to raise their national flag alongside the American one. The colonial administration's response was devastating. Tear gas and live ammunition were turned against the unarmed youth. Bullets from the American military took the lives of 21 young men, while hundreds of others were wounded. This bloody day entered history as Martyrs' Day and became a point of no return. The world was irrevocably changing, and blatant imperial arrogance could no longer continue with impunity. In 1977, under immense international pressure and the threat of guerrilla warfare, U.S. President Jimmy Carter and Panamanian leader Omar Torrijos signed historic treaties. The White House pledged to completely dismantle the zone and hand the canal back to its rightful owners. Exactly at midnight on December 31st, 1999, amid the quiet awe of the crowd,
the American flag above the isthmus was lowered for the last time. After a century of humiliation, blood, and foreign rule, Panama finally reclaimed its land and its destiny. Today, every single day, massive container ships slowly pass through the monumental concrete locks of the Panama Canal. For a single transit, these steel giants pay hundreds of thousands of dollars as electric locomotives silently pull them along narrow concrete walls. Huge steel gates open just as quietly and flawlessly as they did a century ago, obeying nothing but the force of gravity and the immense pressure of water. Tourists on the top decks of snow-white cruise liners take vibrant photos against the backdrop of Culebra's dense tropical forests. They admire the views and enjoy the fresh sea breeze, completely unaware of what lies beneath those picturesque green slopes. And down there, deep in the earth, rest the bones of over 25,000 nameless workers. People whose lives were consumed by landslides, tropical fever, poverty, and the cold indifference of the silver roll payrolls. The Panama Canal is, without a doubt, a remarkable triumph of engineering. But at the same time, it is a somber memorial, an eternal monument to human greed, imperial ambition, and secret financial schemes. A reminder of the terrifying, exorbitant price our civilization is willing to pay simply to tear a continent apart by force and connect two oceans.